For those who are not familiar with us and myself, my name is Steve Smith. I'm the CEO of Combined Knowledge, and we are a Microsoft education, training and adoption specialist company around the Microsoft collaboration platform. We've been doing this for 20 odd years now, and it's basically what we do, and it's what we've helped many companies of all shapes and sizes over those 20 years to making the most of the Microsoft technology stack. So one of the things that we always like to do is put on webinars where we talk about some of the things that we've learned in the industry, some of the good practices that we've discovered working with other clients, and also some of our sort of thought process and recommendations based on the current trend of technology. So this webinar is one of those examples where we're going to talk about the art of the possible, focusing on some of the things and strategies that Microsoft 365 can bring to the table, and things that companies need to think about when approaching that as part of their delivery and their solution. So that's myself. Chris, over to you.
So my name is Chris Casangina, and I also work for Combined Knowledge. I've been with Combined Knowledge for about 10 years now, and my current position I hold is I'm responsible for the training team and also for the quality assurance in our assets that we create, such as our course manuals, course videos, and bespoke solutions that we create for our customers. In regards to my career, I've been involved in many different projects around adoption and taught many courses from the Microsoft stack. But I've also worked alongside Microsoft as their technical editor for their step-by-step book series for the SharePoint product back for the 2013 and 2016 solutions. I also speak at community events as well. Not so much at the moment. That's why we're doing webinars. And if you want to drop me an email, it's chris@combined-knowledge.com.
That's a really good point, actually. Yes, we are looking forward to being able to run actual events with people again. We have got some scheduled later in the year, so the idea is that we will obviously start doing in-person events as soon as possible. We do still feel that you can get an awful lot more from that networking and sharing stuff, having that kind of conversation after a webinar face-to-face. With that, it really does help us to help you, in other words. Okay, thanks. So what is today all about? Well, today is the name of this session is called The Art of the Possible. And the Art of the Possible is a very straightforward concept that we came up with when we were working with customers over the last couple of years with migrating to the cloud, Microsoft 365. And it evolved out of the conversing with customers when we realized that they were very focused on migrating or moving to certain aspects of the cloud and Microsoft's collaboration stack. And that might involve, for example, migrating from SharePoint on-premises to SharePoint Online, moving from file shares into SharePoint Online, or just lighting up Microsoft Teams, as we've had to do in the last 12 months, for people to be able to have remote meetings, etc. And what we discovered as part of that journey in helping customers and training them and building sort of those end user programs was a lot of times we've been working with those clients in a very specific way to help them. And they've not really been understanding or leveraging all of the components that the cloud brings. And when we think about Microsoft 365 as a platform, it's a large platform, and we historically come from very simple platforms in reality: file shares, email, communication using those tools, maybe SharePoint as a document management system, an intranet system. So historically, our businesses have grown up in very siloed ways, and we'll buy products to match what we want at the time, and sometimes they're very disassociated and not always talking to each other. And Microsoft has really been shifting this pattern with the cloud, because they've obviously been building not just applications that we can leverage, but they've built ways for them to talk to each other. And that allows the concept of the art of the possible to really focus on how do you maximize the journey that you're about to take. And I do say about to take because I really do feel strongly about this, in the fact that when we think about moving to the cloud, it is the equivalent of what we did in the 90s, late 90s, when we moved from sort of standard emails and file shares, and we started to move into that sort of collaborating, and then moving into things like SharePoint by 2007, 2010. That journey from sort of the late 90s to 2010 was a 10-year journey that a lot of businesses went on for the first time. It took a lot of effort and design and training and knowledge to get users to use it. Where we are today is really the sort of next evolution of that collaboration step. And it's not only is it lots of new applications and ways of working, but it's also new ways of going forward. So the art of the possible is all about how do we as a business think about maximizing all of those tools and the ways of working that the cloud presents, not just the tools that we've lit up or the way that we're currently using it to solve a quick business process that we've had to implement. And that's where this comes in. Now, the Art of the Possible webinar that we're putting on today is actually part of a bigger Art of the Possible that we deliver. So this is really a pocket-sized webinar. When we actually deliver this workshop for our customers, it's a one-day workshop. And at the end of this webinar, I'll just give you a quick idea of, if you were wanting to run something like this, how we would break that down when we're delivering this to the business. And of course, the other thing about all of these Microsoft apps and the way that we're thinking about 365 going forward is it affects all of the business, whether it's users using the product, technical people setting up, configuring, service desk and support, managing it, and then also the business in terms of the executives and leadership and the stakeholders involved in it. So it's putting all of these moving pieces together and getting it into cohesive messaging within the business and going forward a long-term solution. So on the next slide, when we think about that team, that group of people that I've just mentioned, in order to succeed with this transition to the cloud, and you cannot compare moving to the cloud as building on-premises architecture and collaboration, because the opportunities that the new cloud methodology brings and the tools around it really does mean that there are other options now that you've probably never had or easily had before as a business. So whereas prior you may have needed to bring in developers and custom dev and built these really hard-coded solutions, those days have changed big time. And so that's what we've got to first understand, is that we need to get the team right so that we can deliver the right solutions and then gain adoption from it. And as we know, historically, when IT drives implementation of new solutions, new applications, historically that's met with resistance because our users have grown up with file shares as their historical sharing mechanism, and a bit of email, and obviously sending emails here, there and everywhere. And that in itself can be a big change for a lot of users. And if it doesn't make life better, more productive as a business and the users as well, then we find that change is very resisted from within the business itself. And getting those groups of users on board and having the company with a clear vision of why they're doing this cloud, why are we moving to this system, what do we gain from it, and what have we realized that we need to implement, and what have we realized we need to do in order to benefit from all of these new solutions. If we just approach migrating to 365 as a lift and shift of on-premises, you will not benefit from the shift because it just has so much more that it can do, but it has to be part of a longer-term solution. And really what you're doing is you're going all into this cloud tool set. And Chris will expand on this in a minute, but when we say all in, it is basically a poker game where you are putting all your chips in the middle, because you're not going to start taking data out once you've started moving down this route. you're committing the business to implementing services and applications in a way that you've probably never looked at before, and changing the productivity and ways of working goals and the ways that you're going to implement that, which could take years. And a lot of times people think that this is a migration is a lift and shift, a quick thing, as I said before. But in reality, if we're planning the art of the possible of Microsoft's cloud technology and maybe other cloud services that we want to work with, if they're not all talking together as we migrate our data over to it, then all you'll end up with in the next 5 years is this kind of jigsaw puzzle which has got big chunks missing in the middle, and they don't all touch each other in terms of being able to leverage each other's benefits and capabilities. So in a jigsaw puzzle, the first thing everybody does is they get the outline correct. But if you've got big blocks missing out of that outline, you're never going to ever finish the jigsaw. And so really the art of the possible is about getting those jigsaw pieces aligned to the way your company works, to the way the applications will fit for you, and then making sure that you are creating a strategy that moves you in that right direction. And don't ever think that you need to put a timeline on it. You will put timelines on small pieces of wanting to achieve what and when, but the ultimate goal of everything in terms of using those tools could take, like I say, months and years in some situations, just like it did when we were setting up SharePoint back in the day. That could take a year or more to get some of those things designed and correct. And the one thing that I will say before we move on to the next slide for Chris to expand on this, the one thing I will say is that when you think about the fact that you're all in, just bear that in mind, is the fact that you can't just stop it. You can't just go back and redesign your 365. You get a tenant that is your production tenant. You start moving your data and working and designing your tools. If you then decide 3 years later that you want to change it all, re-architect it, start again, you cannot. We used to do that on premises. People used to go to SharePoint on premises. When Microsoft brought out a new version, they would simply say, well, now's our chance to redesign our architecture because we've learned lessons from the last 2 years. That is not going to be possible in that same way in 365. So there is a requirement as part of your thought process for 365 to align the ways of working with the ways that the tools are designed, so that you don't have to battle that problem in 2 to 3 years' time. And that's where we bring the art of the possible in. Understanding the art of the possible in all the different realms, all the different pieces of the puzzle, allows you to build a strategy to align to that and therefore not cause chaos. And so that's what we think of the art of the possible. And so Chris is now going to expand on that when we talk about that tool set.
So what we often think about is the audience that's coming in for these Art of the Possible sessions. Where possible, if we have some people who are invested in these sessions who can talk to us prior to their delivery, we can sometimes tailor these sessions to speak better to the people who are going to attend. Because you might have very senior representatives from the business sitting on this session wondering what kind of changes are coming their way. So effectively, after Steve's sort of given this introduction around what is the cloud and what are the kind of culture changes we're seeing and what kind of diverse groups of people we have in an organization, we start to look at the actual tools that we are using as part of an organization as well. So effectively, it doesn't matter who you are in a business, you're always going to be using a range of tools to achieve your tasks. And as you probably know, those tools can be physical. So you might want a second monitor to give you the opportunity to increase your productivity, or it might be a digital solution. I have several digital solutions on my computer that allow me to cast my phone to my screen or take quick screenshots or create videos. And these are just a selection of tools that I need to do my work. And quite often that would, by having the right tool, increase my productivity if it's the right fit. So what often happens is businesses will go out and purchase a lot of different tools, and when they start to bring them all together, we might notice a few problems. There might be duplications of certain tools in the business. One team that's decided to start using one video editing suite is completely different from another team that may be less experienced and they may be using a different video editing suite. And one of the problems is duplication. So we've got different tools to support in the organization. And we could also have a scenario where the tools we have prior to selecting these new pieces of software have no compatibility. They don't work together. So you might build a solution, but you might have to increase your workload to get a file from this new system back into your old system. So one of the advantages we want to advocate with the Art of the Possible is helping the business realize that these products, these tools that have been created are being created with the idea that they should work together. And it's quite often we get questions around how do you tackle the fact that the business already has a task solution like Trello, or another solution for hosting its videos like YouTube. Effectively, there is going to be some overlap, but the benefit of these particular software packages is that they're designed to work with each other. So yes, Trello has things like task management. It has the Kanban style task management board system, but as does Planner in Microsoft 365, and that could link to a workflow system. So you can actually start automating tasks off the back of these tasks that are being created in Planner. It can send notifications to people's mailboxes. It can give you control over who can see those tasks. So it's putting the power back into the user's pockets for these particular tool sets and allowing us to choose tools that can work together to create these brand new workspaces. Now, when we start to look at these tools together, what we often see are a sea of icons and lots of different products, and we all wonder what these icons do. Some of them we recognize, some of them we may not. With the Art of the Possible session, we don't deliberately try to bamboozle people. What we want to do is show them that there are characteristics of these Microsoft 365 apps that allows you to kind of band them together. So what we often do is we kind of demystify the Microsoft 365 stack by answering the common question, what to use and when. Now, again, this will probably raise questions around what do we do with tools that have these particular scenarios. They match the tools in Microsoft 365. Well, quite often myself and Steve will marry up one tool against the next. If you're migrating from Google Workspace to Microsoft 365 and you kind of want to know what's your Docs equivalent, or it's Microsoft Word, sometimes as part of the Art of the Possible, we like to kind of marry that up and build people's understanding of which tools match which in Microsoft 365. And then once we've kind of identified which tools are relevant, we kind of group them together. So we tend to kind of link into about 5 different categories here, a few of the core apps. Now, you'll notice that in some circumstances, there are apps that many people are likely to recognize in each of these categories, and that just helps guide some of the stakeholders into areas that they'll probably recognize. So we kick off with communication, and we talk about the focus of mailboxes, the precision of being able to target different people around the organization. But we also mention some of the problems with mailboxes, with issues with attached files and the limitations of sending attachments to other people outside the organization. How many of you use WeTransfer or Dropbox to get a large document over to a customer, kind of bypassing your central security to try and get content out to other people? Well, the great thing about Microsoft 365 is that we show people the advantage of sending links over things like attachments. So we explain how links can allow you to redeem control over the content after it's been sent. You can send much larger files. You can choose what level of access those individuals get and whether they can reshare that content with other people or not. So we kick off with something familiar like Outlook, but also explain how it could also be benefited from things like OneDrive, SharePoint, and Teams, and that sharing system behind it. We also introduce Yammer into communications as well, and that gives us that sort of social experience. One of the things Steve quite often talks about in the Art of the Possible sessions are the different demographics we have working in the workplace now. So those younger audiences will hopefully expect social media style systems within the business that they can use to reach out to experts and talk to them about various questions they might have. In regards to productivity, this is a familiar category because a lot of people will recognize products from the Microsoft Office suite. However, you'll notice that we talk about things like Microsoft Forms. Very recently, someone told me that they were using SurveyMonkey, even though they were using Microsoft 365. And what they didn't realize is that Microsoft Forms was a survey tool which fitted that exact need for her position in the business. She just didn't know about it. So that kind of awareness is really important. Not paying for two tools when one tool will suffice. And then it will work, again, with things like Excel and SharePoint and Power Automate to build more advanced systems behind those surveys. Productivity might be managing your own tasks. And when you're being productive, typically that's not just you on your own. You might also be working with other people. So in Microsoft 365, we include the collaborative cornerstones. Products like OneDrive, which is your personal file storage, which you might use to share content with other people in the business or external to the business, or you might be using something like SharePoint to create a kind of enterprise content management system within the cloud. We also talk to people about Stream, where you could create a video portal to host your video content rather than using a public service like YouTube for the same information. And then you've got your directory system, Microsoft Delve, which gives you the discoverability of other people in your organization. And that's the kind of just-in-time help. If you've got a question or need to find somebody who's knowledgeable in an area, Delve can help with that. It's like LinkedIn for your business. Hopefully by that point, the business is starting to see how Microsoft 365 is shaping to be a really powerful tool, but it doesn't stop there. The innovation part of Microsoft 365 is the exciting low-code, no-code design tools where you can build applications for your mobile phone, create vivid reports based off the back of your data, and automate fantastic business processes by utilizing the Power Platform. One of the questions that I did spot earlier in the chat, and I just thought I'd just quickly go back to that very briefly, one of the questions that I had was, do we cover the Power Platform in this session? I appreciate asking the question. Please, guys, throw your questions at us as we're going through the sessions. Let us know your thoughts on this content. But one of the answers to that question is, as you can see, we do kind of lightly brush across it here to explain what the Power Platform is. But we do a demonstration a little bit later in our Art of the Possible that focuses on the Power Platform. But this is what we say is part of the bespoke nature of this. This is not the same thing that we deliver over and over again. We want to make sure that it's tailored for you. So if you feel like your stakeholders will really, if you want to sell this to them, focus on specific areas of the product, we certainly can do that. Now, with all of these tools, we've got hubs that we use to access it. Quite traditionally, that would be something like your web browser, something like Microsoft Edge or Google Chrome. You log into Office 365 and you navigate to these tools utilizing the web browser. But actually, in the Art of the Possible, people are probably feeling a little bit overwhelmed at the moment. And we're showing them these possibilities, but it's like kind of saying, look at all of this stuff. It's like flicking through a book too fast, isn't it? You can't take it all in. And how are stakeholders meant to kind of take this all in when there's so many tools? The answer is we bring the right tools to the right people. As part of this session, what we try to talk about is maximizing collaboration, not by spilling, 30 different tools in front of people and saying, go nuts, by creating crafted experiences for people to adopt. So Microsoft Teams is an excellent hub for collaboration. Because there are so many excellent Microsoft 365 tools, Microsoft Teams actually brings those tools where they're needed to a workplace where people can collaborate on what they need. So as a little bit of an example of that, what we do in the Art of the Possible deliveries is we like to kind of show people a real world scenario. So in our previous session where we talked about modernizing the workplace, I would have kind of showed you a few of these products so that you can get a feel for what they look like and what their functionality are. As we go into this section here, maximizing collaboration, we can then build a collaborative workspace for perhaps a project team to work in. We could quickly create a team, design channels for that team to collaborate in that segregate conversation and segregate files into logical areas. We could then have conversations and invite people into the chat directly within that particular team. And we start to talk about the advantages of that. The advantages being that if we had a project team and we wanted to invite another person into that project team, the great thing about this workspace is that all of the content's there, including all of the chat history. So if I pull them into my new project team, they've got everything they need, unlike a mailbox system where if we just start to include someone halfway through the project, we'll have to catch them up on those email communications. They don't have that legacy. So this, again, is maximizing collaboration. Even for people who are latecomers, this package has everything that they need. It has great file management capacity. So if the team is working to a strict deadline, you've got features like co-authoring, which allow multiple people to work on files at the same time. That's a massive time saver, especially if you've got several people who are queuing up, waiting to work on a document. They could all enter into it at the same time. And this is where the wow factor happens. We show in The Art of the Possible as bringing other beneficial Microsoft 365 tools into Teams as tabs. So we could go to these different channels that are sectioning up conversations and content and bring in things like Planner. As we mentioned, one of the questions we previously had is how would you transition people from things like Trello to Planner? And one of the ways that we mentioned you could tackle something like that is to actually say, you know, we could pin Trello boards that they have already as tabs within Microsoft Teams. You get the familiarity of your old system, but going forward, we say that we don't create boards in Trello. We start introducing boards in things like Planner. And we advocate that Planner has more features. It integrates better into Microsoft Teams. It gives you notifications via your email. You can build workflow processes behind Planner if you need to. So it gives you many, many more benefits. So the idea about this part of the journey is to really open people's eyes to the potential of bringing that fantastic suite of tools into a more structured area where you get what you need when you need it.
It reminds me of, Chris, it reminds me of the Shrek film, which we recently watched again, to great humour at home. You know, it's a bit like an onion, right? 365 is the onion, which is Shrek, right? It's many layers, you know, it's a deep layered thing. But the reality is the users don't want lots of deep layers. You know, even though you might have all of these dots being joined through business process, document management, et cetera, of which certain people will work heavily in, a majority of the users, it's all about the collaboration and the tool and the way that they work with that data. And when I think about talking to a company and talking to some of the business execs about you know, what really are we dealing with here? And what you need to think about with Microsoft Teams, is specifically Teams, really, based on what Chris just said, is if we go back to the last, what I would call client tool that your users had on their desktop, the last tool that we ever had that actually did the same thing that Teams is doing, it was Outlook. The way to think of this is Outlook came out in the late 90s, 2000, Outlook 98, Outlook 2000, fundamentally changed the way we used email. So it invigorated that email generation and the way they used email. And today, we still, if you took email off people today, it would be the end of the world for most people. They just wouldn't know what to do. So it's the same thing. Microsoft Teams is doing a new thing for collaboration today in the same realms that Outlook did it back then. And you think it's taken 20 odd years for us to get to this point, to have a new client that basically becomes the new go-to for the users. Common question I get at that point is, well, we still need Outlook though, right? Because we still got email. The answer is yes, but Microsoft has got plans to inject the email inbox into Teams. So when you think about it, as an average user that only gets, say, 20, 30 emails a day, or even less than that for some users, but they're more involved in collaboration around documents, but they can see both in the context of the same tool, that is a big game changer. And when we say the art of the possible, this is what we mean. It's like, what has changed, what's coming, what are we going from, and what are we going to, and how do we transition that change? And as Chris just said, Microsoft Teams is pulling it all together. We're bringing those multiple layers into one. And I guess I might as well carry on with security and compliance now that the slide's up there from Chris.
Yeah, definitely.
So that brings up the challenges with it, though. I mean, by having all of these tools and by having different devices and methodologies of sharing and working with that data and those apps and those mobile phones and laptops, and completely transitioning the way not just the company can collaborate internally, but also externally, there is very high importance that needs to be aligned to how we work with email sharing, data sharing, and the business process behind that. Microsoft is not only introducing plenty of tools to help you, they're actually becoming a market leader in their security tooling around this. And they have many different types of security models, practices, policies, and tool sets to help with implementing different tiers of security, depending on how you're trying to use it as a business. I've actually seen some companies turn security to the 9th degree, and they've dialed it right up to the point that nobody can actually collaborate properly. And it's actually forcing people to use the old tools rather than the new tools because of the fact that the security element has not been updated. So a lot of times companies have old security documents that they are adhering to from on-premises that has not been converted to a cloud-ready document and policy. And companies have to go through that as well in order to align the two things. So somebody could say to me, oh my gosh, we've learned this. We can do all this in Teams, and we can connect this and that, and I can have this app that I can connect to this information, and I can now work remotely on a train or wherever and work with that sensitive data. Well, yes, you could, but in order to do that properly, we need to make sure the device you're using, if you were to leave it on the train, isn't being exposed unnecessarily to data theft. If you're bringing your own device, maybe you're using your own iPad at home and you want to be able to access the office using the apps, you want to make sure as a business that, you know, we're not exposing data into the wrong apps and copying and pasting data between Dropbox and OneDrive, and making sure that we just basically make it easy for the users, but securely. And Microsoft has got lots of new tools that bring in this integrated collaboration and security capabilities. So if I am going to allow people to share data from their OneDrive and invite an external user to work on that with me as a draft document. So imagine a scenario, user sends me an email with an attachment on a project that we want to work on that we've just discussed with a customer on a phone. The email turns up in my inbox. Power Automate takes that email, drops it into my OneDrive automatically. It's like, why are you doing attachments? Let's get rid of that. Put it into OneDrive. Now I can work on that document with OneDrive, share it back to the customer, but this time they're getting a link to the document. We now have one source of the truth. We can invite other people in to draft on it with us. When it's ready, we move it to the collaboration space or the document management space, which would be Teams, SharePoint, and then at that point it's exposed to a bigger audience that might be project team, etc., working with that customer, and it might be a completely different group of people that is exposed to from a security model, be it internal or internal and external. So getting those pieces right not just encourages collaboration, but it also means that we are maximizing the tool set. And is that a culture change for a lot of people? Absolutely. Not just the culture change for the users, it's actually a culture change for IT, for the security people, for the business leaders. There's core changes that happen throughout the business model. And to maximize 365, you have to get everybody on board. So if you don't get people who manage the devices on board and the people who develop policies for control and collaboration and interlink the three, you're going to miss a huge trick of what moving to the cloud is all about. And this goes back to that all-in point that I made earlier. If you're not all in, you're not going to make those right decisions, because if you're not made that initial business decision that we're all in, people will be able to effectively put a brake on the whole evolution of your collaboration model on the back of saying, we can't do that because our security doesn't allow it. That might mean that your security needs to be thought about again. And in fact, I know that Microsoft this year, there's a huge focus on their security tooling for awareness and education. And skills is key. Skills around this area will be critical as part of that discussion around what's possible with the cloud. And I think, again, if we think of it as a long-term project, not a short-term thing, as long as people realize they've got time to do this properly, there are certain things you need to do at certain stages, for sure, before you open things up. But if you do it in the right order and in the right groupings, then you can open key collaborative tools up without sacrificing security and be able to do that fairly quickly to benefit the users and sharing externally. So we spend a lot of time, depending on what audience we're talking to, mapping and aligning the security and compliance to that. Somebody asked a question, actually, I've noticed already. Are we recording this? The answer is yes. So we will be posting up a link for you all. We'll send out a notification where you can access the recording. We'll stick it on our YouTube channel, so there will be access to this afterwards, yeah, for sure. So moving on from security and compliance.
Apps for mobile devices, yes. I'm not going to steal Steve's analogy. He has a very good one about how he now, before lockdown, he had quite an interesting analogy about how he works on the train compared to, several years ago to modern day. But it's no lie to say that mobile devices are becoming more and more present in businesses. And some of the reasons for that is that people need choices in the way that they collaborate. And if they are someone who is traveling and, getting a clunky laptop out on a train is just going to be inconvenient when all they need to do is make a couple of changes to a document, then using mobile devices is going to be very important. Now, one of the things to be aware of is that having apps for mobile devices doesn't necessarily mean mobile apps. Remember that Microsoft 365 is a cloud-based tool predominantly accessible through a web browser. So if I were on a different device, i.e. I've gone to visit a friend but forgotten to do something quite critical on the documents back at the office, I could actually securely log on their computer, go into the web browser, and then I could actually make a change to that document using the web version of things like Word, PowerPoint, and Excel. These web versions of these popular tools that you'd normally have installed on desktop computers mean that we don't necessarily need to be using computers that have the right software installed to be able to view and edit content on the go. But one of the things that did change is that when we start to open up those experiences on tablets and mobile phones, they're not ideal. So Microsoft created a selection of mobile apps that complement Microsoft 365. They're all free. You just need to download and sign into them with your Microsoft 365 account, and then you turn your mobile device into a business tool. You can answer your Teams calls directly from the Teams app. You can even walk over to your laptop on a Teams call on your phone and transfer it directly to another device like your laptop. These highly integrated tools are definitely changing the way that businesses work. But one way that we understand these tools are used is that they're not just put on business devices. They're also put onto personal devices as well. So people who have a personal mobile phone can download all of these tools. And technically, they could sign into those tools with their Microsoft accounts on a non-business device. So what Steve will kind of enhance the conversation around shortly is the fact that that can be controlled. you can silo that information and keep it so that data in your business apps can't speak to other apps on that device. If you have an organization, people are actually excited about using these tools mobilely, but they don't actually have a business tablet or a business phone. The thing that I'm most excited about, and going back to a question that was asked earlier on in the webinar, was the innovation tools, the Power Platform. Being able to build mobile apps on a designer and then have that appear on your own mobile phone is incredibly exciting. And to complement that with things like automation, so that these apps don't just put data into systems or provide data, they actually start business processes, is highly exciting. So one of the things that you want to show in these Art of the Possible sessions is a realistic example of how that works. So what we like to show our audience is a scenario where we want to maybe create like a holiday app. So what I'll do is I'll create a quick table which acts as an area to store the holiday requests. I'll complement that with an approval workflow and then quickly build an app on top of the data source. Publish it so that what I can literally do is grab my mobile phone, cast it to the screen, and show the audience myself using my brand new app directly in front of them that I literally published minutes earlier. And that just gives them, again, this perspective of what Microsoft 365 could do for them. Rather than starting to say, you know, well, we need a more bespoke tool for this business process, let's see what's out there, they're starting to look at what they could build themselves. And maybe Power Apps and Power Automate and Power BI combined together could be a much more valid way to build business solutions in the future. I'm going to pass back to Steve just if he's got some additional insights to complement mobile devices.
Yeah, sure. So that was a good example, Chris. I mean, I'll give you another one. We were working with a customer last year, and this really does sum up, you know, if you're trying to work with your business and say, you know, we really need to think about this art of the possible. It's a really important topic, a conversation that we should be having, because the art of the possible is all about putting it all together. And you can only do that if you have that broad understanding of all the different things. So we were working with chatting to a client. In fact, the client was a friend of mine. I'll use client loosely at the time, but we did end up working with them separately. But the bottom line was, in conversation, it started with we're just looking at using SharePoint to store some data, and we've got a SharePoint list, and we're going to build this list, and we want to interact with our salespeople and our shops globally, etc., and have some information exchanged. We're trying to do it in SharePoint, and we're getting, this bit seems to make sense, but we'd like to get some other stuff in place, but we're not really able to get that working. And so that started that conversation. It then quickly moved to, let me understand a bit more about what you're actually trying to do here. What's the business scenario that you're trying to solve? As soon as they started to expand on that business scenario, it became very apparent to me that there were better tools now in the cloud to help them solve this problem. Yes, SharePoint might be one application behind the scenes that helps drive some of that information. But in reality, it was a combination of tools like SharePoint, Power Apps, Power BI, Power Automate. And what they were trying to do was bring together information from the frontline worker who only had mobile devices, and they had usually iPads, but they might have had mobile phone. Well, no, they had iPads at the time. They didn't realize they could use their iPhones as well. And what they hadn't realized was it was possible with things like Microsoft Power Apps to build a custom interface that would sit as an app, as an icon. So imagine going into the Apple Store and downloading an app that puts an icon on your device. So you can create your own app, your own icon from a Microsoft application, and then push that out. So my IT could be told, hey, everybody who's in this group of users needs this app on their device. So IT can create a policy that pushes that app onto their device so they don't have to think about that. Then they go and have a quick awareness campaign to engage them on how to use it. We've got it secure because we can set up policies that mean if that mobile phone that the sales reps are using is their own phone and they leave the company, we can selectively wipe the data from that phone because we have control of the app. That's where this whole control versus collaboration comes to the fore. And of course, when they click on that app, it launches all the pieces that they need to do their job, whether it be information sharing, pictures, data gathering, and then at the back end, the managers have got Power BI dashboards, leveraging all of that data for their reports at the end of each week. It fundamentally changed the way that they think about using data, and it actually sped up the response time to that data many times, which, you know, over a year could make a massive impact on millions of dollars worth of business. And it's things like that that is, for us, when we think about putting it all together as the art of that possibility of the tool set, you know, things like mobile devices, when you see these things in action, you realize that actually that is a huge shift for a lot of businesses in the way they work and the way we collaborate as users. And as Chris said, one of my favorite stories of my own for this is the fact that I used to, well, I still, you know, when I'm allowed, on the train commuting here, then everywhere, I always used to have my laptop out. As soon as I got on, laptop out, emails, catching up, da-da-da. So, and without realizing it, I have to say, I kind of just stumbled across the fact that I was no longer using my laptop. I'd get on the train and I'd get off an hour later and all I'd use was my phone with the apps on it. I'd literally answered conversations, emails. I'd logged in and looked at a couple of files that people had. I actually didn't need my laptop all of a sudden. That is a transformation that a lot of people will be going through. And it takes, you know, sometimes that culture change and the awareness to make that happen. But when it does happen, it's very powerful. In fact, talking about culture change, I believe the next slide is just about that, isn't it not, Chris?
What a segue.
Yes, the big knotted ball of yarn. So whenever you are thinking of the possibilities that 365 and cloud brings you, right, putting all these bits together that we've talked about, you know, it's important to have that whole discussion. Everything is important. You can't turn around and say, well, we'll do this bit, but not this bit. You have to have the conversation around all of these topics. Adoption is no different. And I know adoption is a hot topic in a lot of, I'll call it groups of people of the day. You know, there are, you always notice that there's always a lot of traffic when, say, Microsoft comes up and says, we're going to make adoption a big thing. They're making it a big thing because obviously they want to ensure that their technology is understood. When we think about adoption and when we're talking to companies about adoption, it's not just about a particular way of adoption. It's not just about let's get your users migrated to 365. Let's build a champions program or let's build a IT skill set. It's actually, and the key word is sustainable adoption. When you're putting all of this together, everything that we've just spoke about, sustainability comes from looking all the different ways that you want to progress with the technology, all those possibilities that are now there that we may never have approached before. And then how do you build programs that support that both initially, in the medium, and then as an ongoing success criteria for the business? So one of the things that I've always thought about is, do you have a group of people that are in charge of the adoption success as part of the plan itself? So if you have a group of people that are the project team, in that project team, do we have representatives from the business, IT, technical, service desk, super users, power users, or champions, whatever you want to call them? They're all basically the same thing historically. We've got our user base, obviously, and comms, communications, engagement team, and then obviously adoption and success team. Now, I've just mentioned a bunch of different groups of people. Depending on what company you're with, that could be 1, 2, 5, 20 people. It depends. Some companies have those groups already, some do not. And they realize, oh my gosh, we don't have those people. We really need to find those people to help, because going back to the original point earlier around the cloud being, you know, ever evolving and we're all in, you have to have a way that as a business, as you start to implement these tools and as you start to light more features up and as you start to release more capabilities to the users, you have to have a way, depending on what it is you're trying to do, that engages those users. So it might well be that you need to have an engagement around communication, Yammer, a live broadcast talking about it where the CEO comes up and goes, hey guys, starting next month, we're going to release this fantastic new tool. You know, we've revolutionized the way that our retail staff or our frontline workers go on site when they're working with, you know, our vulnerable users out there in the community, and we're going to have a new way that they can report that information back, and we're going to work with homeless people and get them directed to shelter really quickly. And you know, we can literally revolutionize the way the tool set can be used. But first of all, this is what we're going to help you with. This is coming. So it's like that engagement to get ready. Then you start preparing skills to get people ready to use the tools that they're going to be given. You release the tools, so it's no surprise. And the tools are based on feedback from those users as to what they want to see. And engagement comes from those, and the skill sets come from different ways to deploy those skills depending on what it is you're releasing. A skill could be something learned in 10 minutes. It could be a set of skills that needs half an hour, and you could have workshops that are streamed live, recorded like this, and also have what we would call on-demand video and access to post-event information. It could be flyers that are printed out and laminated near shared computers, or it could be hints and tips, emails and Yammer discussions to support it. And all of those things are part of an adoption storyline. And you can't solve adoption with one of those things. An adoption is an ever implemented solution. So you can't just say, I'm buying it for a year. I'm buying adoption for 6 months. It doesn't work. It has to be a part of the long-term solution. So people have to be part of it. And there have to be people that work together that make that happen, such as comms, engagement, business leaders, who all have to be on board together. And I've noticed quite a few companies have gone through this sort of initial 365 transformation. They called it the digital transformation, right? That was a hot buzzword a few years ago. Digital transformation, everybody. So they basically moved stuff to the cloud, and some of them lifted and shifted it. They did some adoption in the form of some training and a bit of this and a few champions. And within 18 months, they've all gone back to their old ways of working. There's been no long-term strategy. And so now they're finding that collaboration and usage is starting to, you know, decrease. And people are kind of going back to the old ways of working, not sustaining the new ways of working and the tools that they should be thinking of implementing. And it's a really a key part of the 365 storyline is, well, I'm not going to call it 365. I'm going to call it cloud. Because the cloud brings us all of these new capabilities, like Chris was talking earlier, you know, these new tool sets. And if we don't have a model to maximize use of it, in 5 years' time, you could have chaos, or you could have nothing. It's literally a very expensive file share at that point, which is the last thing you want to have. So that's very important to do that. Now, in the next slide, Chris, if you just want to bring it up. So some people, when we work with customers on this, quite often they'll say, what does if we were going to do an art of the possible workshop internally, you know, if we wanted to deliver something around this, you know, how long should it be and who should be in it? So when we deliver it, this is a breakdown of what we would normally do for this. So just to give you an idea of the things to think about if you were going to approach this from a business perspective. Each of the sections that we've talked about in this webinar would usually be between an hour to 90 minutes, most of them, focusing on that subject, and where possible, having that conversation within the business about how would that work for us? What examples have we got that we could relate that to? And what have we done in the past that hasn't worked, and how does that change going forward to fix that? Because if we're going to do cloud, we need to fix that process, because the process can't be redone over and over and over again when we rebuild the on-premise servers, because we can't do that going forward. So we have to think about that as in the storyline. And depending on what area, I mean, obviously we can jig these around, and as can you when you think about the timings, but we usually find that having everybody in the room who's part of the project team, and everybody must be in the project team that represents each of these areas together, so you can basically have that discussion. That then leads to the full sort of day and the maximum use of that time. And always make sure you've got a chance as well to put it all together through some sort of summary discussion, Q&As, and then being able to say, how are we going to move forward now knowing what we've learned? And that needs business leadership as well. You know, the business leadership must be in on this to make sure it gets properly implemented based on the agreements at the end of this day. And if you've already got a situation where you've already had a lot of these pieces put into play, the art of the possible might be, what do we do next? And we've worked quite closely with companies where they've deployed, say, Microsoft Teams, and they've got hundreds and hundreds of teams, and they've realized that chaos is ensued. How do they now bring it back? And if you're going to bring it back to go forward with a proper thought process around what the next year to 2 years will look like in the growth of that collaboration and productivity. So this is what we would normally deliver on a workshop of this type when putting it all together internally. If you'd like us to advise a bit further, and even if you'd like to engage us on this, you know, contact our sales at combined-knowledge.com. I mean, I'm sure we'll send you a link out following on from this webinar where you can get more information and see a recording of this video to watch it back as well. But I really, I mean, I've worked with a lot of companies and talked to a lot of companies on this. I am still seeing far too many companies using what I call legacy thought process when moving to the cloud. Moving to the cloud requires businesses to really start to change the way they think about collaboration and the way we are going to work over the next 5 to 10 years. And if we don't start thinking about that now, we're not going to ever make the most of the tool set. So it's very important that we think of this now before it's too late.